It Comes at Night is probably my favorite horror movie of the year so far because of the psychological quandaries that the film poses. Questions like, who opened the door? What is it? Is the ending of the movie a dream or reality? In this video, I'll be giving my interpretations on some of the many ambiguities posed by writer-director Trey Edward Shults, who I'll be referring to as Shultsy for the rest of this video for some reason. Just for clarity's sake, let's do a quick recap of all the character names. The original family is led by Paul and his wife is Sarah. They have a teenage son named Travis. The guest family consists of the father Will, who is married to Kim, and they have a young boy named Andrew. There will be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the movie, just pause this video, spend the next 97 minutes watching it, then unpause this video. Ready? Go. The end of the film is driven by the introduction of the sickness into the household. This starts one night when Travis is awake, as he often is, to find the little boy Andrew sleeping in the middle of the living room. He wakes him up and returns him to his room, where he crawls into bed with his parents, who don't seem to wake up. As Travis is returning to bed, he hears something in the house. He approaches the door and finds that it's partially open, with their dog, who had run away earlier, dying on the floor. This, of course, causes panic and finger-pointing from both families. Paul worries that Andrew wandered out and caught the disease from the dog, and he uses the fact that Andrew was out of his room as evidence to say he may be a sleepwalker. Will points out that Andrew can barely even reach the door handles and implies that Travis may have actually been the one to open the door. The obvious flaw in that story is that we know Andrew was out of his room, so unless somebody opened it for him, it's proof that he's able to reach the doorknob. But the possibility of it being Travis still exists. Kim knows he has sleep issues and tends to wander around after dark due to their prior kitchen conversation in the middle of the night. Kim and Will both seem to be fairly innocent. We can see them sleeping while Travis brings Andrew back to their room. It's easy to assume that Paul and Sarah would also be asleep at this time, and they would have no reason to open the door and endanger themselves like that. After thinking about it further, I don't think Sarah could really be responsible because of her generally non-malicious attitude. I can, however, come up with a reason that Paul might have been the one to open it. Paul is very hostile towards Will as soon as they meet. The only reason it would seem that he even allows Will to survive at first is that Will mentions the fact that he and his family have food but no water. Paul formulates the plan to have them move in, use them to learn how to be more self-sustainable, as we see in the scenes with Travis learning from Will, before framing them and killing them in order to gain sole access to the livestock while maintaining the trust of his own family. If that is his plan, it is a most devious one. Some might go so far as to say that he lured Will in, using the fire set at the beginning of the movie to attract potential victims to take advantage of. However, while this is a possibility, I don't think that's what happened. Paul knows about his son's sleep issues, and while I think he will do immoral things to protect his family, I don't see him doing something that would potentially put them in danger, especially so soon after having to put down his own father. I believe there is another possibility. So when they find the dog, he's lying inside the house. So he's out past the red door, but not all the way outside past the last door. In simpler terms, if you compare their setup to an airlock, he's inside the airlock, meaning someone or something opened the door to let the dog in. You might argue that the doors were just accidentally left open, which already seems like an unlikely possibility to me given how seriously they take security. But I think the main factor that disproves this is the symptoms of the dog. The human symptoms seem to include large boils, excessive perspiration, and the excretion of blood from the mouth. The dog, however, looks to have excessive bleeding and, from what I can see, a huge gash on the body. And while we don't know how the symptoms differ from animals to humans, I would say that it looks more like the dog was attacked than diseased. So the question becomes, who attacked the dog? In the scene where the dog runs away, it's basically left open-ended. He runs off, seems to be barking at something, then goes out of sight, and then suddenly just stops barking. You could make the case that that's what it is, some kind of monster or a mutant that comes out at night to spread the disease. And while the idea of that is pretty creepy, it's almost less unsettling than the alternative, which is that other humans have found out where they live, come into their house, and killed their dog to try to spread the disease to them. There's actually more evidence to support this theory than the monster theory, because when Paul and Will go to retrieve Will's family, they're attacked by other humans, for seemingly no reason other than to possibly jack some supplies. While we never find out the true intentions of their aggression, thanks in part to Paul's overactive trigger finger, we at least know there are people out there in the wilderness who want to kill Paul. For all we know, they were already on their way to kill Paul and his family when he and Will set out. So, based on all this information we have, I would theorize that one of the marauders from the wild captured the dog, infected it, then dumped it back in the house to try to destroy the family, with the hopes of later driving them out and salvaging their supplies. When I first saw the movie in theaters, it ended, the credits rolled, and the first thing I or anyone else in the theater said was, "So wait, why is it called It Comes at Night?" Shults hasn't given us an answer on that. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that he's not talking about Stephen King's It, or the It that follows people. We already talked about the possibility of there being some kind of monster out there, so let's further explore those possibilities. I think the reactions of the dog are the best evidence for the theory. If there is a creature out there, that's probably what's causing his animal instincts to go on high alert. It wouldn't be that different from how animals seem to have a sense for real predators or natural disaster. Some say that animals and little kids are somehow on closer wavelengths to the paranormal, and the two who seem to freak out the most before that fateful night are in fact the dog and the child. I personally don't think that Shults intended anything paranormal going on though. It could be more of a metaphorical connotation. Could it be a reference to the sickness? That would seem to make sense, seeing as how we're never given a proper name for this disease. And if you think about it, all the characters who have or seem to have this illness appear to get their symptoms at night. The grandfather at the beginning of the movie is put down at night, and the dog shows up dying at night. Andrew starts coughing and crying at night, and of course Travis has both nightmares about the sickness, and the sickness itself seems to come up at night. And while we're on the topic, another possibility is that it is supposed to represent dreams or nightmares, which almost always come at night. Unless you're me and you stay up making YouTube videos instead. I need sleep. But if you think about it, dreams kind of make sense because all the paranoia, all the damage to Travis's mental health ties back to his dreams. He can't sleep because his nightmares are haunted by the sickness. His waking hours are all spent trying to strengthen the family's protection against the sickness. In a way, he has a separate disease of his own, the one that lives in his head. And also, without him being up and about at night, they probably never catch Will, and of course, he probably never contracts the disease from either Andrew or the dog, whichever one of the two were the ones to transfer it. But above all of that, I think that it is something far scarier. Scarier than some monster out in the woods. Scarier than some crazy nomads competing for resources. Scarier than a disease that has wiped humanity to its brink. What I'm talking about is fear itself. When you think about it and dig a little deeper, fear and paranoia are what drive all the suspense in the entire film. When Will first breaks into the house, Travis and his family hear the unknown intruder. When Paul kills the marauders in the wild, he does so out of fear. The two families drift apart and become paranoid about what they don't know about each other. That's out of fear. And that turns them against each other, and they come to fear each other. It's also important to think about what builds this fear. Most of the suspense comes when the families are locked away in their own rooms, discussing their lack of trust for the other because of what they don't know about each other's past, discussing what should be done with the other party, discussing morals and safety precautions, all due to fear of the unknown. These conversations, by nature, take place in private, after the sun has gone down, from the safety of their own bedrooms. It comes at night. You may have noticed a couple of opposing motifs in the movie, and please go ahead and let me know which ones you've noticed in the comments. I'm going to talk about water and fire and what they symbolize in the film. Water and fire are opposites. They cancel each other out. However, they're both used for the same purpose in It Comes at Night: cleansing. At the beginning of the film, fire is used to cleanse the disease from the house when they burn Travis's grandfather. The next step for their family is to try to move on from their loss, and not long after, Will shows up looking for supplies. Paul captures him and ties him to the tree, then waits it out to make sure he doesn't have the sickness. That's when Paul makes his prisoner an offer. He asks him to tell the truth, and in exchange, he will supply him with water. So this is the first example of somebody using water to cleanse and achieve purity, even if it is less directly than other examples. Throughout the film, as Travis struggles with nightmares of him suffering from the sickness or contracting the sickness, he periodically takes showers to try to not only literally keep himself clean and disease-free, but also to try to clear his mind and hopefully help improve his situation. I would also say it's no coincidence that the showerhead is so pathetic and depressing, and barely manages to keep him covered, similar to how his current living situation is barely keeping him covered, keeping him alive. We do end up seeing Travis in the bathroom again, but this time there's no running water on him, just a black liquid running from his nose. The precautions that have been taken didn't help, and now Paul will have to turn back to the only cleansing solution that has been known to work: the fire. I'm going to explore this topic a little deeper in the upcoming segment, so just remember what I said about the two opposite elements being used for a similar purpose. Something that It Comes at Night does differently than a lot of films is that it remains objective about its characters and allows the audience to take sides based on what they see. For the most part, we as the viewers are not manipulated into choosing one side or another, except maybe by one fact, which is that we're introduced to Paul's family first and meet them in the midst of a tragedy, the loss of a loved one, causing us to want to feel some compassion for them. For much of the story, Travis seems to be our protagonist, his parents, the allies. However, before the end of the movie, I was beginning to question Paul and Sarah's morality in the situation, and have come to think that they may be the real antagonists of the story. So let's take a step back and analyze everything that's happened from an analytical and psychological standpoint. Paul loses his father to the disease and, as a result, becomes extremely strict about the family's routine and safety precautions. We don't really know anything that happens before this, only that the epidemic didn't take place that long ago because Travis still remembers what life was like before it. Will breaks into the house and Paul shows no mercy, striking him down and taking him prisoner. At this point, I'd like to point out that the story isn't necessarily told from Paul's point of view. Both characters have unknown pasts, which are occasionally talked about, but it's up to us to figure out if they're lying. Well played, Shultsy. Well played. Next thing you know, Paul is moving in Will and his family. He doesn't really give them much of an option. Given his paranoia about having someone out there in the world who knows where they are and knows that they have resources. So if we can just run with the idea of Will being the protagonist, then this is his inciting incident. This is what kicks the story into motion for him. On his way out, they're both attacked by marauders, but eventually gain the upper hand. Paul finds himself in a position where he can either let the guy go or kill him. Will is thinking logically and suggests that they try to get some information out of him, but Paul just goes ahead and pulls the trigger. This shows something about both of their characters. This also won't be the last example of Paul withholding or avoiding the release of information, and as someone who's supposedly a victim, behavior as such seems awfully suspicious. Then, to add to that, when Will questions him on it, he becomes accusatory, and it's as if he's trying to shift blame off of himself. Remember what I said about water and fire? Let's continue to analyze the story by framing the characters as these elements. Will is water, trying to cleanse the world and do what's best for his family in a logical, non-destructive way. Paul is fire. He'll burn through anything to stay clean. Lives, resources, pets, friends, and even family. Let's fast forward a little bit to the part where the dog runs off. First, Travis gives chase. Will takes off after him, and it would seem his intention is to protect him from whatever happens. Paul, on the other hand, is just furious at Travis for endangering himself like that. This could be an essential turning point in the movie, another potential opportunity to learn more information. Answers to questions like what got the dog so riled up, what lies beyond their property, and what got to the dog that made it suddenly stop barking. Paul doesn't allow any of this to be answered, and he uses his dominant position in the household to retract both of them and cut off any chance of learning more. Since his goal is to protect his family, he really could benefit from such information. And I think this is the point in the story where Will starts to have second thoughts and starts to realize that Paul may have good intentions, as all good anti-heroes do, but he could be going about it in a harmful way. He's fire, Will is water. This key difference between them continues to cause clash through the climax of the film. Andrew gets sick, and they both have different ways of going about it. Will just wants to leave and fend for themselves out in the wild. Paul is uncompromising in his plan to kill Andrew. This part is told through Paul's point of view in order to maintain the suspense of the true condition Andrew is in. Most movies are told through the protagonist, but I just don't think that that's the case here. The guy goes on to kill Will. Then, as Kim and Andrew are clearly just terrified and trying to escape, he shoots them down as well. It's also heavily implied that he does the same to his own son. I'm not even trying to suggest that he's entirely in the wrong. I think the best villains in fiction have a good reason for what they're doing, and what makes them evil is the way they go about it. I think it's reasonable to say that Paul is scarred from what happened to him at the beginning of the epidemic, and these scars have made him jaded and unrelenting. I feel like he's endured something that anyone in his situation would have the same reaction to. This theory is going to be a little shorter, and I don't necessarily think that it's true, but I'd like to bring it up so we can open a discussion in the comments. which totally won't turn into a shitstorm because the comments are such a happy place. But anyways, what do you guys think about the idea that when Travis took Andrew's hand to take him back to bed, that he was infecting the child, not the other way around? The only evidence against it is that Andrew gets his symptoms first, but who knows, maybe something like that would show up sooner in a child. I also think it's possible that Travis has actually had the sickness for quite a while, and it first began to manifest itself as a psychological attack which merely precedes the physical symptoms. That would also explain why we hear Andrew crying at night after he gets infected before we ever see if he actually has boils or anything. Again, just some food for thought. Or should I say, pudding bread for thought. Not much is known about what the disease is actually supposed to be, or what it's supposed to represent. We just have a couple of small clues, the first of which is this painting shown at the outset. I researched it and found that it's called The Triumph of Death by Peter Bruegel. Shults actually talked about this painting in an interview with Birth Movies Death, link in the description, where he said the following. So I'd seen the timeless house I wanted in the film, and I saw that the family should live in it, but I wasn't quite sure why. And I had this book on Bruegel, and I stumbled on the Triumph of Death painting, and found out he made it during the Black Death, the Bubonic Plague, and I was just haunted by it. This vision of skeletons literally pulling people to their graves in a hellscape. I was drawn to it. Shults has also mentioned in several interviews that this movie was essentially binge-written at the time of his father's death, so this ended up being a very personal piece for him. His dad died of cancer after a lot of suffering, so it would seem that all the pain that comes to the victim and their family during cancer treatment inspired the effects of the disease in the movie. Obviously, cancer isn't contagious, so I see the fictional disease as a combination of the effects of cancer with some of the symptoms and characteristics of the bubonic plague in the 14th century. I was originally going to wrap it up here, but after surfing around the internet and reading some reviews, I decided to cover one more theory. The idea that the dark ending was merely a dream and that the true disease is actually a mental disease, and Travis is being driven crazy by it. The theory proposes that his obsessive paranoia with the disease causes him to lose touch of what's real and what's not, a la Inception. The theory is backed on the presentation of the dream scenes in comparison to the climactic scene. The dreams are all shot in anamorphic lenses, which basically give the camera a much wider angle of view, making characters look smaller and less significant. The music in the climax was also similar to the dream sequences. I like both of those choices, but I just don't think Shults was trying to say that this scene was a literal nightmare. I think it was more along the lines of, now your worst nightmares have become reality. This is what it's like to live a nightmare. I'm basing this off of one thing, and one thing only, the headspace of Trey Edward Shults. Writing this movie days after losing his father, he had to have had a pretty dark outlook on life. Things probably felt hopeless. He probably felt helpless, living in a nightmare that he knew he couldn't wake up from. So if you enjoyed this movie, let's all show our support to Shults. Go ahead and like this video if you'd be interested in seeing him direct another horror film, and let's see how things stack up. As for me, my name is CZ, and I too direct psychological horror movies, among a few other things. Check out these links to see some of the stuff I do here on the channel, and if any of it looks interesting to you, then go ahead and subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week. You'll also need to ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.